The night was quiet in the small town at the edge of the valley. The sky was filled with stars, and a soft wind moved through the trees. People were already in their homes, closing their doors, and preparing for rest. Nothing seemed unusual, until a bright light cut across the sky. At first it looked like a shooting star, but it grew larger and brighter. The light roared with a strange sound, different from thunder, different from planes. Some people stepped out of their houses and pointed to the sky. Children shouted with excitement while adults watched with unease. The bright object moved lower and lower until it vanished behind the hills with a loud crash. The earth shook, and a cloud of smoke rose in the distance. Myra, a young woman who lived near the woods, felt her heart beating faster. She had never seen anything like that before. Curiosity pulled her forward. Without waiting, she grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the hills. The ground still trembled lightly beneath her feet as she hurried through the trees. The smell of burning metal filled the air. When she reached the crash site, she saw something incredible. A small silver craft lay broken among the rocks. It was not like any plane she had seen. The surface glowed faintly, and strange symbols were carved across its body. Sparks jumped from broken edges, and smoke curled into the night. Myra froze for a moment. She knew this was not from Earth. As she stepped closer, she heard a faint sound from inside. It was not the sound of metal or fire. It was softer, like a weak voice. Myra's hands shook, but she could not turn away. She moved around the craft and found a small opening where part of the hull had split. Inside, she saw movement. At first she thought it was a child. A small figure lay curled on the floor, struggling to rise. Its skin was pale with a faint blue tone, and its eyes were larger than human eyes, shining softly in the dark. The figure's hair was thin and silver, falling across its face. Myra gasped, but then the small being looked at her, and she saw fear. The being was not a monster. It was just scared. Myra knelt down, keeping her voice calm. "It's all right. I won't hurt you." She reached her hand forward slowly. The alien girl hesitated, trembling, but then allowed Myra to touch her arm. Her skin was cool, but she felt real and alive. With gentle care, Myra helped her out of the broken craft. The alien girl stumbled but held onto Myra's hand. She was weak, and her clothes were torn from the crash. Myra noticed she was very light, as if her bones were thinner than human bones. The girl whispered something in a language Myra could not understand. "Don't worry," Myra said softly. "You're safe now." Together they moved away from the burning wreck. By the time they reached the edge of the trees, a few other townspeople arrived. Some carried lanterns, others tools. They stopped in shock when they saw Myra holding the strange girl. "What is that?" one man asked, stepping back. "She's not dangerous," Myra answered firmly. "She needs help." The alien girl pressed closer to Myra, hiding her face. The people whispered among themselves. Fear was natural, but Myra's calm voice gave them pause. An older woman stepped forward and studied the girl closely. She saw no weapon, no sign of harm, only a lost child. She nodded slowly. "We should take her somewhere safe," the woman said. Myra guided the girl toward her own home. Some followed, still whispering, but none stopped her. The alien girl's steps were unsteady, and her eyes darted at every sound. Myra kept speaking gently, as one would to a frightened animal, until they reached her small wooden house by the stream. Inside, Myra set the girl down on a chair. She lit a lamp, filling the room with warm light. The girl looked around in wonder. Her large eyes followed every movement. Myra poured water into a cup and offered it. The girl hesitated, then sipped carefully. A look of relief spread across her face. Myra smiled. There. Better. The girl did not understand the words, but she seemed to understand the kindness. She nodded slightly. Outside, people gathered at Myra's window, still uncertain. Some asked if they should call soldiers or officials. Myra shook her head. Not yet. She is just a child. Look at her. Does she look dangerous to you? They could not answer. The truth was clear. She looked more fragile than frightening. That night Myra stayed awake, sitting near the girl. The alien girl dozed lightly, but she woke often, glancing around with fear. Myra placed a blanket over her thin frame. The girl touched the fabric curiously, as if she had never felt such softness before. She wrapped it around herself tightly, almost hiding inside it. Myra whispered, "You're safe here." The girl slowly closed her eyes again. For the first time since the crash, her breathing became steady. As the night grew deeper, Myra thought about what had happened. A ship from the stars had fallen into her valley. From that wreck had come not an enemy, not a beast, but a girl. She was far from her home, alone, and frightened. Myra did not know what her story was or why she had come, but she felt sure of one thing. Humanity had been given a chance to show what they truly were. And Myra decided she would not let fear destroy that chance. She would protect this girl. She would help her learn what it meant to be safe among humans. In the quiet house, the alien girl slept in the chair with the blanket wrapped around her, while Myra kept watch, her eyes filled with both worry and hope. The crash had changed everything. This was only the beginning. The morning sun rose over the valley, painting the trees with golden light. Birds sang outside, and the stream beside Myra's house sparkled. Myra was already awake, preparing food in her small kitchen. She kept glancing toward the corner of the room where the alien girl still slept, curled up under the blanket. The girl had not moved much during the night. She had refused to lie on the bed when Myra offered it. Instead, she chose the chair, as if she was used to hard, narrow spaces. Myra did not push her. She understood that trust would take time. When the smell of warm bread filled the room, the girl stirred. Her large eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she looked frightened, as if unsure where she was. But then she saw Myra, and her fear softened. She sat up, still wrapped in the blanket. "Good morning," Myra said kindly, even though she knew the girl would not understand. She placed bread and a small bowl of fruit on the table. The girl sniffed the food with curiosity. She touched the bread carefully, broke off a small piece, and tasted it. Her eyes widened. She ate slowly at first, then faster, as if she had not eaten in many days. Myra smiled. "I'll make more for you." The girl looked up at her and gave a small nod. It was the first clear sign that she understood Myra's care. Later, Myra led the girl outside. The sun warmed their faces, and the sound of the stream filled the air. The girl stepped onto the grass, bare feet touching the soft ground. She froze, staring down at the green blades. Then she knelt and touched them with both hands, as though she had never felt anything like it before. She lifted her head and looked around with wonder at the trees, the flowers, and the sky. Myra watched silently. She realized the girl was not just visiting Earth. She was discovering it. Some townspeople came by, curious to see the stranger again. They stood at a distance, whispering. A few children peeked from behind their parents. The alien girl noticed them and stepped back quickly, gripping Myra's arm. Her breathing grew fast, fear flashing in her eyes. "It's all right," Myra said softly. "They won't hurt you." Myra raised her hand toward the people, signaling them to stay calm. Slowly she guided the girl closer. The children stared with wide eyes, and one of them, a little boy, held out a red apple. He placed it carefully on the ground and stepped back. The alien girl tilted her head. She looked at Myra, who nodded encouragingly. With small steps, she walked forward and picked up the apple. She turned it in her hands, studying its color and shape. Then she took a careful bite. Juice ran down her chin, and she blinked with surprise before smiling faintly. The children laughed with joy. The people saw this and their fear began to fade. She was not a threat. She was only different. That day, Myra gave the girl a name. "Lyra," she said gently, pointing at her. "Your name is Lyra." The girl repeated the sound awkwardly. "Lyra." Myra clapped her hands with joy. "Yes, Lyra." From then on, Myra used the name often, teaching the girl simple words. "Water," she said, pointing at the stream. Lyra repeated. "Tree," she said, touching the bark. Lyra tried again. Every time, Myra smiled and encouraged her. Bit by bit, Lyra began to build a small bridge between her world and theirs. As the sun set, Myra decided to show Lyra more of the house. She guided her to the room where a soft bed waited. The blanket was neatly folded, and the pillow looked inviting. Myra patted the mattress. "Bed," she said clearly. Lyra stared at it. She touched the edge, pressing her hand against the softness. She frowned, as if unsure what it was for. Myra lay down for a moment, then sat up, smiling. "Sleep," she explained. Lyra copied the action. She lay down on the bed slowly, her silver hair spreading across the pillow. Her body tensed, as though the softness felt wrong. She sat up again quickly and shook her head. She muttered something in her own language, sounding uneasy. Myra did not force her. She only nodded and said, "When you're ready." That night, Lyra again chose the chair in the corner. She wrapped herself in the blanket and watched the shadows on the wall. Myra wondered what kind of life she had lived before, where beds were unknown, where comfort was strange. In the following days, Lyra learned more. Myra taught her how to wash her hands with water from the pump. Lyra laughed when the cold drops splashed her face. Myra gave her clean clothes, plain and simple, and Lyra touched the fabric in wonder before wearing them. Sometimes, when the townspeople visited, Lyra hid behind Myra. Other times she watched the children play with a ball in the yard. Slowly, she began to smile more often. She even laughed once when a dog ran up to her and licked her hand. Myra kept noticing small things. Lyra often touched walls and floors with her hands, as if checking if they were real. She ate food with care, almost as though each bite might be her last. And every night, she refused the bed, choosing the chair instead. One evening, Myra asked softly, "What was your world like?" She did not expect an answer. But Lyra raised her eyes, filled with sadness. She spoke a few words in her language, her voice heavy. Myra could not understand, but she felt the weight of them. She reached out and held Lyra's hand. Lyra gripped her tightly, and for the first time, she did not seem like a lost visitor. She seemed like someone who needed family. That night, when Lyra finally closed her eyes, Myra thought about everything that had happened. A week ago, the valley had been normal. Now, a girl from the stars lived under her roof. She was fragile yet strong, afraid yet curious. And though she came from far away, she was beginning to belong. Myra whispered to herself, "She is one of us now." And in the silence of the house, Lyra slept with the blanket close to her heart, while the bed remained untouched. The day would come when she would try it, but not yet. For now, she was still learning what it meant to live in a world full of care. The days passed slowly, and each one brought new discoveries for Lyra. She was learning words, small ones at first, then longer sounds. She laughed more often, and she no longer hid behind Myra every time the townspeople visited. Still, there was one thing that had not changed. Every night Lyra chose the chair instead of the bed. Myra often watched her. The bed stood ready, with a soft blanket and pillow, but Lyra always looked at it with suspicion. She would touch it with her hand, test the mattress for a moment, then shake her head and curl up in the chair. Myra understood it was not fear of the bed itself. It was something deeper, a memory that Myra could not see. One evening, after a warm meal, Myra decided to try again. She led Lyra into the small bedroom. The window was open, and the moonlight shone across the bed. Myra touched the blanket gently, then looked at Lyra. "Bed," she said in a calm voice. Lyra stepped closer. Her eyes moved slowly across the blanket, the pillow, the wooden frame. She placed her hand on the surface again, pressing lightly. She seemed puzzled, almost confused that something could be so soft. Myra sat down on the edge, then leaned back until she was lying flat. She smiled. "Sleep," she explained. Lyra frowned, watching closely. Her hands tightened at her sides. She whispered something in her own language, a sharp sound filled with unease. Myra sat up again and reached for her hand. "It is safe," she said kindly. After a long silence, Lyra climbed onto the bed. She moved as if stepping into unknown ground. She lay down stiffly, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes wide open. For a few moments she stayed like that, her body tense. Then she sat up quickly, shaking her head. She muttered again, her voice shaking. Myra touched her shoulder. "It's all right. Only when you're ready." Lyra jumped down and returned to her chair, pulling the blanket tightly around her. She would not try again that night. The next day Myra decided to be patient. She did not ask Lyra about the bed again. Instead, she showed her new things. She taught her how to help in the kitchen, cutting fruit with care. She guided her to the garden, where Lyra touched the soil and laughed at the worms wriggling in her hand. Myra even showed her books, turning pages slowly while Lyra studied the drawings. But every night ended the same. The bed stood empty, while Lyra chose the chair. On the fourth night, something different happened. A storm rolled into the valley. Rain struck the roof, and thunder shook the walls. Lyra sat upright in the chair, her blanket clutched tight. Her eyes darted to the window with every flash of lightning. Myra knelt beside her. "It's just a storm," she explained gently, though she knew Lyra could not understand the words. When another loud crack of thunder shook the house, Lyra cried out softly and pressed herself against Myra. Her whole body trembled. Myra guided her to the bed. She pulled the blanket over both of them and wrapped her arm around Lyra's shoulders. "Safe," Myra whispered again and again. At first Lyra resisted, trying to sit up. but Myra's calm warmth held her. Slowly, her breathing softened. She remained tense, but she did not leave the bed. Instead, she pressed her face against Myra's shoulder, eyes wide open. For the first time, she stayed on the mattress through the storm. When the storm finally ended, Myra felt Lyra's body relax. Her eyes closed for a moment. Her breathing grew slower. And then, as dawn light touched the window, Lyra slept on the bed for the first time, though Myra remained beside her. The next evening Myra wondered what would happen. She patted the bed and said the word again. Bed. Lyra hesitated. She stood still for a long time, staring at it. Finally, she climbed onto the mattress, but this time Myra did not join her. She sat nearby, giving Lyra space. Lyra lay stiffly once more, her hands gripping the blanket. But after a while, she turned onto her side. She closed her eyes, though not fully. Her body twitched with small movements, as if she was fighting a memory. Then, suddenly, tears slipped from her eyes. She covered her face with her hands, her body shaking silently. Myra rushed to her side. She touched her back gently. "It's all right. You're safe." Lyra cried quietly, tears soaking into the pillow. Her chest rose and fell quickly. She tried to speak, her words broken in her strange tongue. Though Myra could not understand, she knew this was not simple fear of a bed. It was the shock of comfort, the weight of kindness. Lyra had never known such things before. The softness was too much, a reminder of what her world had denied her. After a long time, her sobs grew quieter. Her hands loosened. Myra stayed beside her, whispering gentle sounds. Lyra finally turned her head, her eyes red but calmer. She looked at Myra with confusion, as if asking why. Why had Myra given her this? Why did humans offer what her own kind never had? Myra touched her cheek softly. "Because you deserve it?" Lyra did not understand the words, but she felt their meaning. She closed her eyes again, tears still on her face, and drifted into uneasy sleep. That night Myra sat awake, thinking. She realized the bed had become more than furniture. It was a symbol. To Myra it was comfort, but to Lyra it was something foreign, something that shook her world. Lyra's reaction was not simple fear. It was the pain of realizing she had lived without safety for so long. By morning, Lyra was still asleep. Sunlight spilled across the room, and for the first time, her breathing was calm on the bed. Myra smiled gently. It would take time, but she knew this was the start of change. The alien girl had begun to understand what it meant to rest without fear. The morning after Lyra's first night in the bed was quiet. The birds sang outside the window, and sunlight filled the small room with gold. Myra sat on the chair near the wall, her eyes on the sleeping figure. Lyra lay curled on the mattress, her silver hair spread across the pillow. For the first time since the crash, she looked peaceful. Myra felt a wave of relief. It was only a bed, something simple for humans, but for Lyra it had been a wall she could not cross. Now, that wall was broken. When Lyra finally woke, her eyes blinked against the light. She sat up slowly, her face puzzled. She touched the blanket, then the pillow, as if checking if it was still real. Then her large eyes turned toward Myra. For a moment, silence filled the room. Suddenly, Lyra's lips trembled, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Myra stood quickly. "What is it? Are you hurt?" she asked, though she knew Lyra could not understand the words. Lyra shook her head. She pressed both hands against the blanket, clutching it tightly. Her tears came faster. She began to tremble, her breath uneven. Myra rushed to her side and held her shoulders. "It's all right," Myra said softly. "You're safe here." But Lyra's reaction was stronger than before. She cried openly, her voice filled with sounds of pain that Myra had never heard from her. The bed had not simply given her rest. It had unlocked something inside her, something buried deep. Myra guided her to lean against her chest, rocking her gently. Lyra's thin frame shook as she released everything she had kept hidden. For a long time she had lived without safety, without comfort, without a place to rest. Now, in the softness of the bed, she felt all the weight of her past pressing against her. Myra did not speak much. She simply held her, allowing the storm inside Lyra to flow out. The crying lasted long, until Lyra's body grew weak and her eyes heavy. She fell into another sleep, this time against Myra's shoulder. Later that day, when Lyra woke again, her face was calmer. She did not hide in the chair this time. She remained sitting on the bed, looking at Myra with eyes still red from tears but brighter than before. Slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed at the blanket. "Safe," she said, using the word Myra had repeated many times. Myra's heart filled with joy. She nodded. "Yes, safe." From that moment, the bed became a symbol of change. Each night, Lyra climbed onto it willingly. She was still tense at first, her body stiff under the blanket, but with every night she grew more comfortable. And every morning, she woke with the same tears, though now they were softer, almost like a release. The townspeople noticed the change as well. Myra often invited them to see Lyra's progress. Children played in the yard, and sometimes Lyra joined them, though carefully. She touched their toys, laughed when the ball bounced, and even tried to repeat their words. The townsfolk, once filled with fear, began to see her as one of their own. One afternoon, a young boy asked, "Why does she cry at night if she is safe now?" Myra thought for a moment before answering. "Because she is learning what it means to feel safe for the first time. Sometimes safety feels strange when you have never known it before." The boy nodded, though he did not fully understand. As days turned into weeks, Lyra's reaction continued to surprise everyone. She learned more words, pointing at things and naming them. Tree, water, sky. But the word she used most often was safe. She would point at the bed, the house, even at Myra, and repeat it. It was the word that meant everything to her. Yet her reaction was not always simple. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Myra would wake to hear Lyra crying in her sleep. Her body shook, and her voice called out in her unknown language. Myra would rush to her side, hold her hand, and whisper until she calmed. The next morning, Lyra would smile shyly, as if apologizing. Myra never complained. She understood that the bed had given Lyra more than comfort. It had opened the door to memories that were painful but necessary to face. One evening, while the sun set in colors of red and gold, Myra sat with Lyra by the stream. She pointed at the water and asked, "Home?" She hoped Lyra might speak of her world. Lyra looked at the water for a long time. Then she shook her head slowly. "No home," she whispered in broken human words. Myra felt her chest tighten. She realized then that Lyra's world had never given her what Earth was now offering. Perhaps her people had lived in constant struggle, without kindness or comfort. Perhaps they had never known something as simple as a bed. That night, When Lyra lay down again, she touched the blanket with care. She whispered a few words in her language, words Myra did not know. But Myra understood the feeling behind them. They were words of thanks. As weeks passed, Lyra's unexpected reaction became a story for the whole town. People spoke of the alien girl who had cried at the gift of a bed, who had shown that even the smallest act of kindness could change a life. Farmers, workers, and children alike came to see her smile. And each time, they left with new respect for the meaning of simple human compassion. Myra often thought back to the night of the crash. She had found a frightened child in a broken craft, trembling and alone. Now, that same child slept under her roof, discovering the world step by step. The bed was only the beginning, but it showed Myra something important. Humanity's strength was not only in machines or tools. It was in their ability to offer safety to someone who had never known it. One night, as Myra tucked the blanket around Lyra, the girl smiled up at her. She touched Myra's hand and whispered, "Family." Myra's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. "Yes, family." And as Lyra closed her eyes to sleep, her reaction was no longer only tears of pain. It was a mix of sorrow, healing, and hope. The bed had become a place not just of rest but of transformation. For Lyra, every night was still unexpected, but now it was filled with the slow, steady growth of trust. And for Myra, every night was a reminder that sometimes the greatest change began with the smallest gift. The town slowly grew used to the strange girl from the stars. At first they had gathered outside Myra's house only to whisper, afraid of what she might bring. But as the days turned into weeks, fear gave way to curiosity, and curiosity turned into kindness. People began to bring small gifts. Some gave food, some gave clothes, and children often brought toys. Lyra accepted these gifts shyly. She did not always understand their purpose, but she touched each one with care. When a farmer's wife gave her a scarf, she held it against her face as if it was the softest thing she had ever known. When a child gave her a carved wooden bird, she kept it beside her bed, staring at it before sleep. Myra watched all of this with quiet pride. She saw how Lyra's presence was changing not only herself but the whole town. Where there had once been suspicion, there was now patience. Where there had been silence, there was now laughter. One afternoon, Myra took Lyra into the fields beyond the valley. The air was warm, and the sound of insects buzzed around them. Lyra walked slowly, her eyes wide, taking in the tall grass and the open sky. She reached out and let her fingers brush against the plants. She turned to Myra with a smile, a real smile, and said the word she had learned well. "Safe." "Yes, safe," Myra answered. She felt her heart swell. Each time Lyra used that word, it reminded her of how far the girl had come. They sat near a tree, and Myra decided to try something new. She pulled out a notebook and drew a circle. She pointed at it. "World," she said. Lyra tilted her head. She touched the circle with her finger. Then she picked up the pencil and drew another circle beside it. She tapped the second one and said softly, "No home." Myra's eyes softened. She understood. Lyra's world had never been home, not in the way humans understood it. Perhaps it was a place of survival, not belonging. Myra reached over and drew a third circle, then tapped it. "Earth," she said. Lyra looked at it for a long time. Then she smiled faintly and whispered, "Home." From that day forward, their bond grew stronger. Lyra followed Myra closely, helping with small tasks in the house. She carried water, gathered firewood, and even tried to copy the way Myra cooked, though her hands sometimes moved clumsily. When she dropped things, she laughed instead of panicking. Each mistake became a lesson, not a danger. At night, she lay on the bed without hesitation. She still cried sometimes, but now Myra noticed that the tears were softer, like healing rather than breaking. Lyra began to whisper words before sleep, words Myra guessed were prayers or thanks. One evening, a group of children came to play near the stream. They called out to Myra, asking if Lyra could join them. Myra looked at Lyra and asked, "Play?" Lyra hesitated, her eyes uncertain. But the children waved their hands and smiled. Slowly, she stepped toward them. They gave her a ball, showing her how to throw it. At first she fumbled, the ball slipping through her fingers, but the children laughed kindly, not cruelly. Soon she was laughing too, chasing after the ball, her silver hair shining in the sun. Myra stood at a distance, her eyes wet. She realized she was watching something rare. Lyra was not just learning words or tasks. She was learning joy. That night, as Myra tucked the blanket around her, Lyra whispered a new word. She touched Myra's hand and said, "Family." Myra froze for a moment, then smiled with tears in her eyes. "Yes, family." She leaned down and kissed Lyra's forehead gently. The days continued, and with them came new discoveries. Lyra began to share small parts of her past, though her words were broken. She pointed to the sky and said, "Cold. Fear. No soft." Myra listened carefully, piecing together the story. Lyra's world had been harsh, a place without comfort, where she had never known warmth or safety. Now, Earth was teaching her something new. The simple act of sleeping in a bed, of being offered kindness without demand, was rewriting everything she had believed about life. The townspeople grew protective of her. When outsiders visited the valley and asked about the strange girl, the villagers stood firm. "She is one of us now," they said. "She is safe here." Lyra began to trust them too. She no longer hid when new faces appeared. Instead, she stood beside Myra, her hand in hers. When asked her name, she answered clearly, "Lyra." And when asked how she felt, she always used her favorite word: "Safe." One evening, Myra took her to the highest hill overlooking the valley. The stars filled the sky, bright and endless. Myra pointed upward. "Your home?" she asked gently. Lyra shook her head. She looked at the stars for a long time, then turned to Myra. "No home. Here home." She pressed her hand against her chest, then touched Myra's shoulder. Myra could not stop the tears that filled her eyes. She hugged Lyra tightly, holding her as the stars watched from above. The bond between them had become more than caretaker and child. It was deeper, a bridge between two worlds. The bed had opened the door, but love had built the connection. In the weeks that followed, Myra noticed that Lyra began to change in small ways. She was stronger now, her steps more steady. She laughed more freely, and her eyes shone with life. The frightened creature who had stumbled from the broken craft was gone. In her place was a girl discovering what it meant to belong. And though the galaxy beyond still held mysteries and dangers, Myra knew something important. Humanity's true gift was not power or weapons. It was the ability to connect, to give safety, to turn a stranger into family. That gift had changed Lyra. And in return, Lyra had changed them all. The calm days in the valley could not last forever. Life had a way of testing bonds, and soon Myra and Lyra would face their first great challenge together. It began when a group of strangers arrived. They came from outside the valley, riding in large vehicles that rumbled loudly across the fields. They wore heavy coats, carried strange devices, and spoke with sharp voices. The townspeople gathered near the square as the strangers stepped out, their eyes scanning everything with cold interest. One of them, a tall man with a metal badge, raised his hand and spoke. "We heard there is something unusual here. We need to see it." The villagers glanced at one another nervously. Some looked toward Myra's house. Myra stood in front, her heart beating fast. She felt Lyra's hand clutching hers tightly. "There is no problem here," Myra said firmly. "Only people living in peace." But the strangers did not leave. They searched the town, asking questions. They noticed how the villagers protected Lyra, how they hesitated whenever her name was mentioned. Soon, their eyes turned to Myra's small home. That night, Myra sat with Lyra by the fire. The girl's silver eyes were wide with fear. She had sensed the danger even without words. Myra stroked her hair gently. "You are safe here," she whispered. But inside, she worried. If the strangers discovered the truth, they might try to take Lyra away. The next day, the strangers returned. This time they brought tools that scanned the air. One of the devices beeped when pointed toward Lyra's house. The tall man narrowed his eyes. "Something is here," he said. "We must investigate." The townspeople stepped forward as one. "No," said the farmer's wife. "You cannot take from us." Others nodded, their voices rising. "She belongs here now." The man frowned. "You do not understand. This is not your choice." Lyra clung to Myra's arm, her voice trembling. "Safe?" she asked. Myra looked at her with steady eyes. "Yes, safe. We will protect you." That night, the townspeople gathered in Myra's home. They spoke in hushed tones, worried about what might happen. Some feared the strangers would bring soldiers. Others feared they would bring machines to capture Lyra. Myra listened and then stood. "We gave her a bed when she had none. We gave her family when she was alone. If we allow her to be taken, then everything we believe in is lost. She must stay." The people agreed. They would not let the strangers decide the fate of the girl they now called their own. The following morning, the strangers marched toward the house. But this time the villagers stood in their path. They formed a wall of bodies, blocking the way. The tall man demanded, "Move aside." "No," the villagers answered together. The man raised his device, but before he could act, Lyra stepped forward. Her small frame shook with fear, but she lifted her hand. The device sparked and went silent. The crowd gasped. Even Myra stared in shock. Lyra had never shown power before, yet now she had silenced the strange machine with a simple gesture. The man's face hardened. "She is dangerous," he shouted. "She cannot remain here." But Myra stepped forward, placing herself between Lyra and the strangers. "She is not dangerous. She is learning to live, to love, to be human in her own way. If you take her, you destroy everything she has found." The standoff grew tense. The villagers refused to move, and the strangers refused to leave. For a moment, it seemed violence might erupt. Then Lyra spoke. Her voice was soft but clear. "Safe. Family. Home." The words carried through the air, simple yet powerful. They were words she had learned here, words that held the weight of her journey. The villagers repeated them, chanting softly. Safe. Family. Home. The tall man looked at them, then at Lyra. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. He lowered his device, though his face was still stern. We will return, he warned. This is not the end. The strangers left the valley that day, their vehicles rumbling into the distance. Relief washed over the villagers, but they knew the danger was not gone. Myra held Lyra tightly. You were brave, she whispered. From that day, life in the valley changed. The people no longer saw Lyra as just a guest. She had become their symbol of unity. They trained quietly, preparing in case the strangers returned. They built stronger walls, shared food more carefully, and planned how to hide Lyra if needed. Lyra, for her part, grew stronger too. She practiced her strange gift, learning to control it. Sometimes she could stop small machines from working. Other times she could calm an angry animal with a touch. But she never used her power to harm. Myra taught her that strength was meant to protect, not to destroy. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Lyra asked a new question. Stay forever? Myra smiled and nodded. Yes, forever. As long as you want. This is your home now. Lyra leaned against her, comforted. The word home no longer frightened her. It filled her with warmth. But both of them knew the warning of the strangers was true. More challenges would come. The world beyond the valley might not understand their bond. Yet in that moment, under the fading light, Myra believed in something stronger than fear. Humanity's true power was not in weapons or machines. It was in the courage to stand together, to protect what mattered most. And with that courage, they would face whatever came next. The valley grew quiet again after the strangers left, but the memory of that day stayed in every heart. People continued their lives, tending to fields, baking bread, caring for animals, and playing by the stream. Yet a shadow lingered. Everyone knew the strangers would return, and next time they might not leave so easily. Myra kept watch more carefully than ever. She often climbed the hill at night to look at the distant roads, searching for signs of lights or dust clouds that might mean intruders. She also spent more time with Lyra, teaching her words, teaching her how to read simple sentences, and teaching her what family meant in every action. Lyra was growing stronger. She no longer trembled when a door closed loudly or when a new face appeared. She laughed more often, and her steps carried confidence. Yet Myra noticed something else. At night, when the stars filled the sky, Lyra sometimes stood at the window, staring upward with a look of longing. One evening Myra asked softly, "Do you miss it? The place you came from?" Lyra shook her head. She pointed to the stars, then placed her hand on her chest. "Past," she said. Then she touched the bed, the fire, and Myra's hand. "Now." Finally, she smiled and whispered, "Home." Myra hugged her tightly, relief filling her chest. Yet she also knew the decision ahead was not only about Lyra's wishes. It was about survival. Weeks later, the strangers returned. This time their vehicles were larger, and their faces more serious. They came with papers stamped by governments, claiming authority. The tall man was with them again. He stood before the villagers and spoke with a cold voice. "You are hiding something not of this world. It must be handed over for study. If you resist, you will suffer consequences." The villagers stood firm, but Myra felt the tension rising. She could see fear in their eyes. The man's words carried weight. They had no weapons, no machines to fight with. Only their unity. That night, Myra could not sleep. She sat by the fire, thinking. Lyra sat beside her, sensing her worry. "Danger?" she asked. "Yes," Myra answered. She held Lyra's hand. "They want to take you away. They will not stop." Lyra looked at her for a long time, then said a word Myra had not expected. "Choice." Myra blinked. "What choice?" Lyra touched her own chest. "My choice. Stay or go." Myra's eyes filled with tears. The girl who once trembled at every sound, who once cried each night in the bed, was now speaking with courage. She understood what was happening. She wanted to decide for herself. The next morning, the villagers gathered in the square. The strangers waited, their vehicles lined like iron beasts. Myra stood with Lyra in front of everyone. Her heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "You ask us to give her to you," Myra said. "But she is not a thing. She is not yours to take. She will speak for herself." The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned to Lyra. She stood small yet steady, her silver hair shining in the sunlight. Her voice trembled at first, but she spoke clearly. "I was alone. I had no bed, no family, no safe. Here I found home. I choose to stay." The villagers cheered, their voices rising together. "Stay. Stay. She stays." The tall man frowned. "This is not acceptable. She is not human. She belongs to science." Myra stepped forward. Her eyes blazed with quiet fire. "You call her not human. But what is human? Is it the shape of the body? Or is it the courage to choose, the need for love, the right to a home? If that is what human means, then she is more human than anyone I know." The words struck the villagers deeply. Even some of the strangers shifted uncomfortably, doubt creeping into their faces. The tall man clenched his fists, but he could not silence the truth. At that moment, Lyra lifted her hand again. The machines the strangers carried sparked and fell silent, just as before. But this time she did not stop there. She spoke with strength. "No harm. No fear. Only safe." The power in her voice made the ground seem to hum. The strangers stepped back, uneasy. They realized they could not control her. She was not a creature to capture. She was a being with will, with strength, with family. Finally, the tall man lowered his gaze. He spoke stiffly. "If she stays, it is your burden. Do not expect help from outside." Myra raised her chin. "We do not need your help. We have each other." With that, the strangers left the valley for the last time. Their vehicles roared away, leaving only dust behind. The villagers cheered, but more than that, they felt proud. They had faced power with nothing but unity and love, and they had won. That night, the town celebrated. They lit lanterns and shared food. Music filled the air, and children danced. Lyra sat beside Myra, watching the joy around her. She leaned closer and whispered, "Safe. Family. Forever." Myra kissed her hair and answered, "Yes, forever." From then on, the valley was no longer just a quiet place. It became a story, a legend. Travelers who came through heard of the alien girl who found a bed, a home, and a family. They heard how a small community defied power because they chose love over fear. Lyra grew in that valley. She learned more words, more customs, more ways of life. She worked in the fields, played by the stream, and told stories by the fire. Yet every night she returned to the same bed, the first bed she had ever known, the one that had taught her the meaning of safety. For Myra, the journey changed everything too. She had taken in a stranger, but she had gained a daughter. She had shown kindness, but she had received strength in return. And for the villagers, the decision had defined who they were. They were not just farmers, bakers, or shepherds. They were protectors of hope. The galaxy beyond might never understand, but in that valley, one truth was clear. Humanity's greatest strength was not its machines, not its armies, but its heart. And in the heart of that valley, an alien girl had found her home.